Good morning, welcome to Run Testers. My name's Nick, and this is our first look review of the Polar Vantage V3. So the Vantage V3 is a major update for what is Polar's top sports watch. There's new hardware and software features to try and get it back in the game in terms of competing with the best watches on the market. It costs £519 in the UK or $599.90 in the US. It comes in black and silver with black, blue or apricot straps. So the first thing to note really is the big, bright AMOLED touchscreen. It's 1.3 inches, it can be set to always on, and it really is very bright. It's got a Gorilla Glass display, and the AMOLED almost feels like it sits closer against that than what we've seen with Sapphire watches with AMOLED displays in the past. You've got an aluminium case with a bezel of aerospace aluminium, which is better aluminium, I assume. There's 5 buttons on the watch in the usual Polar setup with 3 on the right and 2 on the left. It's a 47mm case, and it's 14.5mm thick, so it's not the thinnest watch, but it's also not too chunky, and it's pretty light. It's 57 grams with the strap and 39 grams without. So big new sensors are on the watch. You've got the 4th generation optical heart rate sensor from Polar, which is meant to be more accurate, as is always the case with a new heart rate sensor. It can take ECG measurements, check your blood oxygen saturation and your skin temperature at night. But it's all part of the Polar Elixir platform of body measurements that can help you keep tabs on the state of your body. You've got multi-band GPS too. Now we saw this on the Polar Ignite 3 and it wasn't very good, but hopefully Polar has rejigged it with the Vantage V3 so it can go up against the best sports watches with multi-band GPS. Very accurate watches from Garmin and Suunto are out there, so hopefully the Vantage V3 will be a similar level of accuracy. You also now have maps, offline topographical maps you download via the Polar Flow website. You can also get turn-by-turn directions with routes on these maps if you put them on there via Komoot. If you just download the route to Polar Flow in other ways, you might not get turn-by-turn, but you will still see the route overlaid on a map. You've got Bluetooth connectivity to external sensors, but not ANT+. You've got WR50 waterproof rating, barometer. You've got a virtual flashlight, but no built-in flashlight like you get on Garmin watches. Then a few token smart features like music controls and a pretty good weather forecast, actually. I like the weather forecast. Now, obviously, with a big AMOLED screen like this, you're going to check on the battery life. Polar say it will last up to 8 days on charge if the screen is set to raise to wake. If you have always on enabled, that will come down. Polar told us it offers 47 hours of training time with multi-band GPS enabled and up to 140 hours if you use some of the power saving modes. But obviously, we'll be keeping a very close eye on battery life in general throughout our testing. So I've been using the Polar Vantage V3 since, I think, Wednesday last week. I've done 3 runs with it, and in general, I've really enjoyed using it so far. The design is really nice. The shiny metal maybe looks a little plasticky, but it feels nice on the wrist. It is very lightweight. The screen is great, and it's been really responsive in terms of the touchscreen and the buttons. I haven't really had any lag at all, which is sometimes a problem with Polar watches. No Sapphire, I think, does mean that the colours pop a little bit more than you see when comparing it to things like the Suunto Race and the Garmin Epix Pro, which I've been using at the same time. It really is a very nice screen, and it's really bright. It's also a bit lighter than a lot of the watches in this bracket as well, which is nice. The user interface is pretty nice. Like, I'd say the fonts and almost the setup the Polar uses looks a little bit almost childish to me compared to some of the other ones on Garmin and Suunto, but it is still very nice. You get used to it quickly. There's useful widgets there. You can swipe through them. They do all appear very nice and bright and colourful on the new screen. But yeah, it's not my favourite user interface, but it certainly is fine. The strap is a little bit of a hair puller at first on my wrist. I've got quite hairy arms, but that seems to have settled down. It's a pretty nice strap. The blue and silver combination I think looks really nice as well. So like I said, I've done 3 runs with the watch. First was an easy to steady run based largely on heart rate and effort, and then I did a hard progression 10k based on heart rate, and then a long run in the forest yesterday. And I was really looking to check the heart rate accuracy and the GPS accuracy of the watch. Same time I was wearing the new Suunto Race, which I've been testing as well recently, and the Garmin Epix Pro, which was basically the control watch, which has very good GPS. I connected that to the Polar H10 heart rate sensor to compare the heart rate of the newer watches against it. So overall, the GPS has been really good for me. It's much better certainly than the Polar Ignite 3, which was a bit all over the place. The multi-band GPS on that watch didn't really mean anything. It was worse than previous gen GPS. This is a multi-band watch. You've got very accurate results throughout the 3 runs. It's mostly been very similar in terms of overall distance to the Suunto Race and the Garmin Epix Pro. I've been getting split times at roughly the same time. Like, notably on that hard 10k, I was running a loop and I was getting the lap notifications from all 3 watches at roughly the same time, which is important when you are doing a hard session like that. You want the pacing to be accurate. So if I look at the traces from the 3 watches from the 3 runs, I'd say that the Vantage V3 is maybe slightly below the accuracy of the Garmin and the Suunto. Like, it tends to smooth out corners a little bit more. It'll cut the odd corner. It goes a bit more wayward at times. Like, it doesn't really, negatively affect the overall distance and pacing, but I don't think it's necessarily quite as good as Garmin and Suunto. But certainly this is a very accurate and accurate enough GPS watch. Really good multi-band GPS. I'd be happy using it as my main watch, and I'm, a bit of a GPS nutter and do a lot of sessions paced by my watch, so it's great that it is now so accurate on the V3. In my testing so far, we've still got lots more testing to do, obviously. Heart rate hasn't been great, like pretty standard optical heart rate stuff here. The first run had a lot of ups and downs. Then in the progression 10K, that was based entirely on heart rate. So obviously I was using the Epix Pro because that was linked to the H10 heart rate chest strap, and I couldn't have used the Vantage V3 for that session because it was just reading wrong the whole time. It was too low, it jumped around a lot. And then in the long forest run yesterday, it was just too high the whole time. So I'd be linking a chest strap to this. I probably will do quite soon because I want to test it thoroughly, getting good accurate heart rate data in to look at the training analysis on the watch. Polar say the heart rate accuracy improved. It's pretty accurate outside of runs. It was pretty accurate in a yoga session, that kind of thing. But I just don't think it's still going to be that accurate on runs. Like optical heart rate sensors just aren't very good, especially when it's cold like this and it's harder to get a good reading. Then on my easy forest run yesterday, I used the maps to follow a route, and they're really clear. They're really bright on the screen. It's a fantastic screen. I really like even when I'm comparing it side by side with the Suunto Race and the Epix Pro, the Polar Vantage V3 screen really is very bright and colourful. And I think that, like I say, is partly because it hasn't got the sapphire glass, which would make it more durable, obviously, but it does mean the colours pop a little bit more, I think. You get turn by turn with Komoot. It's harder to get routes onto this watch than it is with the Garmin and the Suunto, which I also put the routes on because you can create the routes within their apps and just send them straight away. Like with this, you have to create it in Komoot and then save it and then wait for it to pop up in your favourites in the Polar Flow app and then select that you want that one on the watch. So it's a bit of a faff, but once it's on there, it works really well. You get the turn-by-turn directions, very easy to follow the routes. The maps are great, nice, bright, colourful, and just certainly a big upgrade for the watch. Downloading the maps to the watch is also a little bit of a faff, but it's quite quick. You have to download them via the Polar Flow website, then plug the watch in and drag them drop. Now, this is obviously plugging something in always seems a bit of a faff, but actually with the Suunto, you have to download them all wirelessly, and that takes forever. So don't really mind that. I think the maps are quite good on this watch, certainly. It's not the level of Garmin's maps, which have things like Climb Pro and are routable maps, so they know where you are and you can create routes on the fly, but it's a nicely done addition to the Vantage V3. Certainly makes following routes easier and more enjoyable. Battery life has drained very quickly on the Polar. The Suunto Race has got pretty good battery life for an AMOLED screen. The Garmin Epix Pro, the one I'm using at the moment, is a 51mm, so again, it drains quite slowly for an AMOLED screen. The Vantage V3 drains very quickly. I've already had to charge it. I got it on Wednesday. I ran on Friday and Saturday, and it was at 32%. I then turned on a better night mode, which I hadn't turned on, a proper Do Not Disturb mode, which disabled the always on screen and stuff like that at night, and I got through my long run the next day, and then it was down to 9%. So I've then charged it, and then overnight, with the screen's been set at the brightest setting the whole time, I will say that, but it's down to 89% after about 20 hours with no running or anything. So it is going to drain probably 10, 12, 15% a day, just natural use, especially with the intensive sleep tracking that Polar does. But then in activities, obviously, that will make it drain even quicker. So you are looking a lot faster than other watches in terms of battery charging, things like 3 or 4 days if you're using the always on screen. So that is certainly going to drain quicker than things like the Suunto Race. But then I will say that Polar's everyday tracking and sleep tracking is a bit more intensive and useful than you get from things like the Suunto Race. So that's been quite good so far. Pretty detailed sleep stuff. It's all still setting up all those baselines for me. So a bit more to come on that front. Also, one problem I've had with the Vantage V3 so far, I had it with Polar watches in the past, is that it does tend to lose connection to my phone quite a lot and have to reset that up, and that's quite annoying. If you're relying on it for notifications and things like that, you have to keep checking it's still in touch with your phone, and when syncing runs over to the app after runs, it's a bit slower, and you have to check the connection compared to the Suunto and Garmin watches, but it's not too big a problem, but it's not necessarily the most on the ball on that front.
Okay, so a little bit on the design first and what it's like to wear the Polar Vantage V3 over a few days. I've had it only for a few days. Now, it's a design and a look that's definitely much in keeping with the Vantage V2, which I think is a good thing. It's that very kind of metallic look, which does help separate it from the other kind of running watches that sit around this price. I really do like the physical buttons. That it's similar to those kind of textured buttons we have on the Vantage V2, but I do feel like they're a little bit better in terms of how they're kind of integrated into the watch case. The watch strap is the interesting one. I think we're all going to talk a little bit about this, but it does kind of pull a little bit at the hairs when you have got it on pretty tightly, and I think you do kind of naturally, because of the way this strap is made, it does feel a little bit tighter than some other watch straps that I've used. It stayed secure, but ultimately that is a little thing maybe I've not absolutely loved in my kind of short time with it. The big story here is obviously the AMOLED display, the AMOLED touchscreen display that we're getting here. My Polar has done this on the Ignite 3. We're now getting it on a kind of top-end Polar watch. And I'm happy to report it is a good AMOLED display. It's kind of up there what I've seen from Garmin, and in terms of what I've been seeing from Suunto on the Suunto Race, which is I've been testing with the Polar Vantage V3 as well too. It's responsive. I'm not seeing any kind of screen lag. So in terms of the kind of performance side of things and what Polar's packing this watch with, I feel a lot more happy about what I've seen with the kind of Polar Ignite 3 in terms of that AMOLED display, in terms of how it kind of operates ultimately. It's nice and bright. I've used it kind of a nighttime run. I used it against the 965 and the Suunto race. It's a nice bright screen. As I said, it's a very good quality AMOLED. I've been using it with the kind of raise to wake gesture support. The raise to wake isn't particularly responsive, so I think maybe going always on when you're in tracking mode is the way to go with this watch. But from a design point of view, very, very happy. I think this is a nice kind of evolution of what we've got the Vantage V2, which is a really nice looking watch. It's just maybe the strap that's a little bit off for me in terms of the design and what it's been like so far. Okay, so getting into that kind of initial kind of run tracking performance. So there's a lot obviously going on here with the Polar Vantage V3. The headline is arguably the kind of dual band GPS mode that we're seeing on most watches now, you know, from Garmin, from Suunto, even from the likes of Apple as well, and some smartwatch makers as well too. Now, we saw it on the Polar Ignite 3. It didn't massively impress us in terms of the performance and compared to some other watches. On the Polar Vantage 3, I've done 2 runs with this, with the Vantage V3. I've done it a 10-mile run with the Garmin Forerunner 965 and also the Suunto race. Those 2 watches in their dual band modes as well too. And I've also done a kind of just over 5 miles as well with the 3 watches again too. And what I've found is the 965 and the race has been a little bit close in terms of that GPS performance, and the Vantage 3 is slightly lag behind, but it's not been the kind of difference which I would say massively I think would be a concern. And I kind of looked at the kind of tracked routes, and there's not major differences in terms of, from that point of view, in terms of the GPS track. So for me, I feel like this is a much better applied dual band kind of setup than it is on the Polar Ignite 3, which is what I would expect to see, because this is, this is a performance watch, whereas the Ignite 3 is really a fitness watch, and I think it's more about kind of casual fitness using it. It was a bit weird to see it on there first. Some of the kind of dual band performance, I've been pretty satisfied. It looks pretty solid overall so far. There's 2 runs, so all good on that side. Heart rate monitoring now, Vantage V3. It's looking like it's going to be a lot like the Vantage V2. I mean, Polar always talk up the heart rate performance on their devices, and I've always found it's been a bit of a mixed bag. And the 2 runs I've done, and they've not been massively quick runs, they've been pretty steady pace runs that I've done. I haven't really pushed that heart rate sensor in a really, meaningful way. And what I'm seeing already against a heart rate monitor chest strap is that it's still kind of lagging in place. I think the average heart rate in general is a lot lower. I think you look at the graphs, it just don't really match up with the heart rate monitor chest strap. It's not really close. I mean, I've had the Suunto race on, and that hasn't been spotless either. But for me, on the Polar Vantage 3, I'm not seeing that massive improvement of what I've seen or what I experienced on the Vantage V2 and most of other Polar's watches. So from that point of view, not massively impressed. Still waiting for the kind of training analysis side of things to really kind of, like I say, I've only had it for a few days. So I can't, really kind of delving into that stuff is going to take a little bit more kind of long term. I have had a look at the kind of mapping side of things. Now, obviously, you can there is mapping support here. You can load maps on here as well too. I've had it out and kind of used it with the, comparing it to the mapping on the Forerunner 965, and I feel like maybe it's not as detailed, but it is still very good, and it is good to finally get that on a, preloaded onto a Polar watch, whereas, you really had to rely on kind of the commute support and the kind of most recent watches. You still have that here, but ultimately you're getting that on the watch already itself, and I think that's a big thing for Polar here, particularly if you're the kind of person that likes that kind of navigation side of things. And it seemed to work pretty well with the kind of touchscreen integration, also with the physical buttons. So from that point of view, all very good from the mapping kind of things side of things. So yeah, solid on that front. And then a few thoughts on battery life as well, because obviously you have this AMOLED display on here now. I would expect the battery life to kind of have a bit more of a drop off in terms of, having that kind of more power hungry screen here. Now, when I did that 10-mile run, as I said, I had the Garmin Forerunner 965, the Suunto race on as well. I had those all in that kind of, the top accuracy GPS modes. And what I saw for that kind of an hour and a half of running, I saw the Polar Vantage V3 drop by 4%, and I think the Suunto race was kind of 5%. And, It's kind of in line with what I've seen with the kind of other dual band kind of GPS battery life performances. And in terms of day-to-day battery life, I haven't seen that kind of worrying drain that I've seen previously on Polar watches, which is quite interesting. You know, that kind of massive drop-off you see overnight, it's not been as severe. And something I've noticed, and I think Nick has noticed as well, there seems to be a bit more of a disconnect between the phone and the watch during the day. And I've noticed where it's kind of become disconnected from the phone. Now, I don't know if that's a weird quirk or if that is a deliberate thing to improve the level of battery life that you're getting, and it's not constantly syncing or trying to search out for the phone as well. So I am seeing definitely better battery life than I have seen on previous Polar watches, where I've really felt like they've drained. And I haven't charged it yet. It's still got a decent amount of battery life after a few days. It feels like it could potentially maybe just get through a week, which, you know, compared to the 965, which is a watch that I use on a regular basis. That's kind of my daily kind of watch that I use. It feels like it's going to hold up pretty well against watches like that. So yeah, battery life does look pretty good. As I said, doesn't feel to or seem to have that drain that I've seen before previously on Polar's other kind of flagship Vantage watches. So it's definitely a positive, particularly when you've got an AMOLED display there as well too.
So I've had the Polar Vantage V3 on my wrist for less than a week, and my early observations are that this is quite a slick, well-designed watch, where the hero here is definitely that big AMOLED screen. Now this is still unmistakably Polar, so it's still very sporty, but I think it's a decent looking watch. It's nice and light, and I think you get good screen real estate here on that AMOLED screen. Now, the accuracy for the heart rate and GPS has also been great so far for me, so while more testing is needed, it's hopefully also not just about that pretty face. However, that display for me is a big step forward for Polar when it comes to display quality. It's bright, it's sharp, the touchscreen is nice and responsive. There's still a bit of a bezel here, there's no edge-to-edge display like you see on some watches. And I salute the attempt here, though it is a bit limited, to put some tappable widgets on the customisable face. That again is kind of a step forward into smartwatch territory for Polar. On GPS, in my initial tests, I've had the Polar Vantage V3 in full accuracy mode to check out that dual frequency accuracy up against the Suunto Race and a Garmin Forerunner 965, and so far it's been solid, not just on the total distance tracking, but also when you dig right into the track details. It's been a good match for both the other watches, with no real stray traces through buildings or into rivers or places it shouldn't go really, some meandering but nothing too crazy. My early heart rate tests have included a slow and steady 10 kilometre and a set of short and fast intervals. I've put it up against the Polar H10 chest strap, the Suunto Race optical here as well, and a £400 Frontier X2 chest strap. And the V3's optical sensor has also been really good. For my intervals, it performed far better than the Suunto Race optical, which was quite laggy and had a tendency to surge high. So good so far on the heart rate. When it comes to battery, one really notable thing is that Polar seems to have fixed the tendency that its watches had to rip through battery life overnight. I've had just 3% on average burn each night. That's with all the tracking switched on, and that's a vast improvement and matches those other watches I've been testing. A 1 hour run in the highest accuracy GPS mode used just 3% as well, and that matched the Forerunner 965 and the Suunto Race, though it's potentially a way off the 61 hours that Polar has on paper for the V3. Now, despite that big AMOLED screen, the daily usage has been around 5% battery life without training, and that's with the always-on screen switched off. Something I'm not a fan of, the strap isn't that comfortable, but then once you've gone nylon, I think it's really hard to go back to those old silicone straps that we've got here. But the Garmin Forerunner 965 is nice to wear even with a traditional strap. I find that I have to adjust the V3 strap a lot to get a good fit for workouts, but then to avoid it being too tight for daily wear, I have to loosen it. If you forget, it can be pinchy. Now, I've also had some syncing issues with the Polar Flow app from the moment I set it up right through. It's sometimes not finding the watch pairing, and I'm having to go in and fiddle manually and do a lot of faffing around to get it to sync the data. Just want it to sync automatically like Garmin does. Really notable when you're testing two watches side by side. Every time I open the Suunto app, the data's already there. With Polar, it's not. So it's really early days in my testing, so I'm not going to give you a verdict on this watch just yet. What I will say is that I think Polar has kicked things on nicely here with the Vantage V3. The Vantage V3, I think, looks like it's going to tick a lot of the right boxes, though more testing is going to be needed. The big AMOLED screen gets a thumbs up from me. That's an improvement over the V2, and it keeps Polar in the game with Garmin and recent AMOLED as Suunto. It's a point of difference as well against Coros, which I think Polar really quite needed to get itself kind of back into contention. The accuracy so far has been on point as well, and that's good news for ensuring all of those Polar insights here have value. The battery life is at least a match for the Forerunner 965 and the Suunto Racing Training Mode. And hopefully it looks like the AMOLED screen won't mean less juice than you saw on the Vantage V2, so you're not sacrificing here for that nice screen. I wish it had a nylon strap like the Coros Pace 3. I want Wi-Fi automatic syncing, or at least I don't want to have to manually fiddle with my watch in order to get the data to the PolarFo app. But overall, I've been impressed so far. I'm looking forward to getting into the fitness training, performance and recovery insights that I think Polar does really well. I want to look at those a bit deeper and get into testing the maps and navigation. If all of that stacks up well, Polar might have a pretty good, nicely priced, strong contender here to go up against the Forerunner 965 and the Suunto race. All things so far so good with this, but we will have to do more testing before the full review.
Okay, some initial thoughts on my first few days with the Polar Vantage 3, and I have to say this is definitely more like it from Polar. I've been waiting for a watch like this from Polar for a while. I feel like the kind of previous Vantage watch have been very good, but it hasn't ultimately pulled me away from using a kind of similarly priced Garmin. And I think with the Polar Vantage 3, I think Polar has definitely got something good here. I think, the first thing, design point of view, all very good. I think that addition of that AMOLED screen as well is a massive plus, and it works well. The performance is there as well too. And then you've got all those kind of Polar features and things like the dual bands, GPS mode. I think the battery life is feeling like it's going to be better than previous Vantage watches as well too. Obviously things like heart rate, some of the analysis stuff as well hasn't been fantastic. I do think you're not getting the best smartwatch experience here, but I do feel like the smartwatch features are starting to improve on the Polar Vantage V3. This isn't the watch you're going to get over a Garmin or an Apple Watch in terms of giving you that kind of amazing smartwatch experience, but it's giving, I think, enough, and I can see that improving over time as well. But definitely a massive improvement for me. I think the execution of having the AMOLED display here and bringing it to a flagship watch in Polar's range has definitely been done very well. And what I'm seeing so far is very, very good. And you look at the price, it's cheaper than the Garmin Forerunner 965. And I do think there's an argument here saying when you see it, the features it's got and it's added seat, kind of, as I said, seat parity with something like the Garmin Forerunner 965, Polar definitely have a rival for what Garmin offers in this space, which is the watch that we named our watch of the year. I definitely think going forward, if Polar continue to improve and evolve this watch and what it's got right now, then I think it definitely has a good flagship running watch here that's packed with features and crucially seems to deliver on the performance side of things, as it has mostly in the first few days I've had with it. But yeah, all very positive on the Vantage V3 mostly. I think the good definitely outweighs the bad in terms of what I've seen so far. And yeah, very impressed Polar, and definitely looking forward to spending a lot more time digging a bit more into that data, particularly the trailing analysis side of things, and seeing what the Vantage 3 has to offer overall.
So quick initial verdict here. It's a really strong start to my testing of the Vantage V3. I really like it. It's clearly the best watch that Polar's made on many fronts. It's a really nice looking watch, very comfortable to wear, looks great, screen's great, GPS accuracy's been very good so far, the newer maps are really useful, all kinds of other sensors going on there. It's very, very high spec watch, and it looks great and it does its job really well so far. Problem it has now is that the competition is so stiff from Garmin and now Suunto, because the price on the Vantage V3 is a little bit tricky because it's the same price as the Forerunner 965 in the US, and you are getting, I think, more features from the Garmin. You get some extra smart features like music storage. The maps are a little bit more developed. In general, the whole thing is just a little bit more developed because the features that Polar are adding here have been on Garmin's for a couple of years. And now the Suunto race is coming in very cheap compared to some of these watches. Like it's £479 or $549 for the titanium watch, which obviously has better materials than the Vantage V3, or you can get a steel one for £389 or $449. That looks like great value for another AMOLED watch with longer battery life. Maybe isn't quite as impressive on the stuff that Polar does outside of sports tracking in terms of general body analysis and sleep tracking, all that, but when it comes to actual sports tracking, the Suunto race has been really good so far in my testing over a similar period, and it is cheaper. So that's the problem the V3 has, but certainly a really impressive watch so far. Looking forward to carrying on testing it, and we'll have plenty more thoughts on where it sits compared to other watches in our full reviews down the line.